Hello there and welcome to another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, I am Rafael Furia, back at it again. And last week I spoke a little bit about the idea of the possibility of living abroad, moving to another country because of the current news. We'll just keep it at that. You can watch last week's video if you want to go deeper into it. But this week I wanted to talk about some of the practical steps that might help to make it possible to be able to actually legally live abroad. I've spoken about some of these things before, but I thought it was about time to revisit this topic. But anyway, again, I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. For some of you who are maybe a little bit more familiar with this project, Not Your Average Globetrotter, or just with living abroad in general, some of these things might feel as quote-unquote basic as somebody going to, say, Starbucks for a pumpkin spice latte. But this episode is more intended to be for those who are kind of starting to think about this potentially for the first time. And there are some things that you really have to think about from a particular perspective. And this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter is actually inspired by an old high school friend. I'm not going to say names or anything like that. Maybe I'll send this to you. So if you're watching, hello, you know who you are. And she was talking about the idea that potentially once her kids have graduated from high school, that she might be interested in the idea of moving to another country. Don't worry, I'm not going to give away any information about who this person is. And if this person is watching, don't worry, I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. But thank you to the you-know-who inspired this episode. We didn't really go into so much detail about living abroad and things like this, but it got me thinking that there are a lot of steps that you really have to take to be able to have a successful transition into life abroad. And also depends on where in the world you want to go and what you want to do. Of course, the two major kind of ways of looking at this could be through a second citizenship or through visa requirements. And there are different ways that you can get different visas. If you're a digital nomad, if you are an entrepreneur, if you are doing X, Y, or Z, or even, I don't think it still exists anymore, but I believe in Brazil it used to be the case that if you were the adoptive parent of a Brazilian child, that you might actually be able to get citizenship there, but I think they ended that because it ended up creating a really bad situation. I don't remember all the details, but actually I will mention Brazil in a little bit here because there is something really interesting with that possibility of Brazilian citizenship and visas and how they all kind of end up working together, and actually specifically related to children. But again, later in the episode. The first thing you really want to figure out is how you're going to be able to legally be able to call your next location home. Again, like I said, for those of you who've watched Not Your Average Globetrotter for quite a while, this may be familiar to you, so bear with me here. And so how can you set yourself up in the best way possible? Of course, that is going to depend from country to country, from visa to visa. There will be certain visas that will be more accessible to one person and more accessible to another person. Maybe you're retiring or you are retired. Whatever it is, maybe say you have a few years in front of you, or you have a year, or you have a few months. If you have a few months, then maybe moving abroad isn't quite the right timing for you yet. But if you've got some time ahead of you, then it'll be much easier to make happen. But for example, there might be some visas, like digital nomad visas, where in Italy, for example, you actually have to show that you've been working as a digital nomad for a certain amount of time beforehand. And also, as a little caveat, I'm not going into specifics of how you get this visa, how you get that visa, but just these are some things to think about generally speaking. Then just in comparison with another country quickly, Portugal, it's not necessarily about how long you've been working remotely or how long you've been kind of doing your own thing in that sense, working through advanced technological means. I forget exactly the wording there, but then it becomes a question also. I mean, Italy does have a financial requirement, but the financial requirement, if I'm not mistaken, in Portugal right now is probably around 2,700 euros a month, something like this. Again, this is not about specifics, so even if that number is wrong, don't worry about it. Like, I'm not telling you how to get visas here. I'm just telling you, you need to think about these particular details before you even go. One of the biggest things that a lot of people will do is think that, well, you know what? I'm an English speaker. I can just go and move and teach English abroad. It's going to be easy. They're just going to give me a job right away because I have a unique skill as an English speaker. No, you don't. You really don't. English is one of the most commonly spoken languages, and there are a huge amount of second language speakers. Maybe there could be certain places where it'll be harder to find English speakers, but finding English teachers is not going to be impossible. I mean, even I've mentioned examples in the past of knowing about situations where maybe one person was a native English speaker, but they got passed up for a native Russian speaker who could also teach English just for whatever reason. It might have been actually a pricing thing. Doesn't matter. But this is what I'm talking about here. You really have to consider all of these different possibilities in front of you and how you can get that ability to work. Because getting a company to sponsor a visa or a business to sponsor a visa for you is not very common unless you're working in the corporate world and they see that there's a need for you to actually be physically based in another country, that they have a reason to actually put you there, that you have some particular skill that you bring to the table, that you are already part of their team. There could be the possibility that maybe you are highly skilled and you've applied for a certain job in a certain place and a visa will be sponsored for you because of that. But again, we're talking about very particular situations here and it's not common. So even if, for example, you are wanting to teach English, it's not common that you'll get sponsored. Can it happen? It's possible, but you might want to start looking at maybe private schools, higher end private schools like American schools, British schools, where they have those curriculums and they want teachers to be able to teach from that curriculum, that have that same way of speaking, whatever it may be. And in that case, if you are someone who does have a teaching degree and you also actually on top, one thing I'm actually going to just go on to a little kind of side note here, that regardless of even if you're an English teacher or not, as a native English speaker, I would say it can be worthwhile to have a TEFL certificate, a teaching English as a foreign language certificate. It's possible to get these online for not a huge amount. There's some studying that can be involved. It's worthwhile learning English properly and how you actually need to be able to teach it. There are those videos out there with people talking about this and going into much more detail than I will be in this video. But why I say it's good to have as a backup is because maybe you need to earn a little bit of extra cash, or maybe you are looking at different jobs. Having that option available to you is not the worst thing. I've taught English in the past, not my favorite thing. I can do it, but I would not say it's my ideal dream job. And having this certificate might be enough for you to be able to teach in a private language school, but not necessarily in a school itself. Although there actually could be some schools that you might find that as long as you have any type of university degree, college degree, that they don't really care too much. Actually, there was one high school that I had a job offer from once, and they said, "Yeah, just show us your degree, and yeah, you're already an English teacher, and you've got a TEFL certificate, so whatever." It just depends on where you are. And again, though, I would say if you are planning on teaching English abroad, do it with a lot of research ahead, because even there are going to be some places where you'll find that getting paid can be an issue. I know, for example, from my experience when I was in Italy, that there were a lot of problems with teachers getting paid months and months and months after their classes had already finished. I'm not saying that this is every school, but I'm saying this is something that I've heard of and that it didn't seem to be an uncommon problem. But I would say in an ideal world, in an ideal situation, it would probably best to be able to figure out how you can work online, how you can work remotely, and how you can do so with the type of job that doesn't require you to physically be located in a certain geo-blocked zone. The reason why I say this is that I do know some people who do work for certain companies online, and their particular jobs that they were doing, or whatever it was, for whatever reason, for security within this company, that they couldn't access the systems outside of the US. Do VPNs exist? They do. Do people use them? Sometimes. But there also could be certain systems in place which block VPN usage. So if you have to use something to kind of get around and kind of finagle your way through, I wouldn't recommend that. You want to have the fewest barriers to entry to be able to get to do your work as possible. Granted, having your work based in a completely different part of the world can come with its own risks. And so that's one thing you also have to consider. For example, if you're working for an American company, but you're living in a part of the world where they use, say, the euro, for example, Europe specifically, then you'll also have to take into account with your life abroad the conversion rate. Not just the conversion rate, but how much does it cost you to get your own money into the currency that you need to be able to use to spend it. I mean, for example, I've mentioned Wise, formerly known as TransferWise, in a bunch of different episodes. A lot of people use things like this. Revolut is another option out there that exists because converting your money every month or every week or whatever it might be gets pretty expensive pretty quickly. And so even actually sometimes timing the market can help, but that's not always possible to do. You might just need your money when you need your money, and there might be a big dip in the market. And maybe I remember years ago when the dollar to the euro was like $1.50 to €1 or $1.60 to €1. And so, I mean, that's painful if you're losing that much on your conversion. And then also you'll have to think about how you're getting paid, how you're set up for taxes, and where you're earning the money from. Are you earning the money in your own country and then it's getting taxed in your country and then you're having to transfer it to yourself? Or are you in the type of position where you're earning what would technically be a dividend from your business? Or how are you going to be receiving your money? Speaking to somebody who's an accountant who can really guide you through all of this will be really important, and not just an accountant in your own country, but an accountant from the country that you're going to. I mean, I've been saying this for years that I wish I had somebody that I could recommend, but I don't feel as though that there's anybody out there that I can say that I can recommend for two systems to be able to work between two systems. I've only really ever had luck kind of piecing services together. We've talked about visas so far. You're just going to have to look at the specific country that you're going to, what visas are available, what might work for your particular set of circumstances, and see if one of them could be right for you. Not every visa is going to be right for every person. I mean, for example, a retirement visa could be great for somebody who is at that retirement age, but maybe in a country like Italy, where you actually are not allowed to work when you have a retirement visa and you still are in a position where you have to work, then Italy might not be the best choice for you. So looking into these various options that will be across the world could be really important. But let's talk about dual nationality, dual citizenship, having a second passport. Again, I'm not going to be going into specifics here, but just generally speaking, looking into citizenship by descent is going to be the first thing that I recommend to most people. Even if maybe, for example, that your ancestry comes from a part of the world that has a passport that's not that attractive to you, I still say it's worthwhile looking into and considering, because you never know when you might want to have a backup available to you. Having another passport, as long as it's a passport that doesn't charge you and doesn't make you have to pay taxes or have a consideration for double taxation or various other things, then I would say it's worthwhile considering if there's not going to be an effect on your day-to-day life. So if you're not an American citizen and you're thinking about getting American citizenship, I have a difficult time recommending American citizenship personally, or really any kind of financial entanglement with the US. It's just, whatever. Different subject for a different day. But getting citizenship by descent is not the only possibility. I mean, there might be the way that you would get a visa that would be a pathway to citizenship, that you legally migrate from one country to another and that you live there for X amount of time to be able to meet the basic minimum requirement to get a passport citizenship in that country. Or do you have to get permanent residency first? Some countries might require you to be a permanent resident first and then get your citizenship after that. Or is permanent residency enough for you? But I would say yes, even permanent residency can be a great option for some people, but at the end of the day, it's not citizenship. Being a permanent resident is similar in some ways, but definitely not the same as being an actual naturalized citizen of a nation. When you're a citizen of a country, there might be some countries out there where, for example, if you were to commit some horrible act within the first few years or even after those first few years, they might look at you a little bit differently. Then in that type of situation, okay, a new citizen might be a little bit of a different case, a little different situation than a natural born citizen, like born and raised in a country, or even a natural born citizen from outside of the country. Or another option that I was talking about a little bit earlier that has to do with Brazil. Again, as always, not legal advice here, but there are some people who have spoken in the past about going to Brazil, giving birth there, and being able to get a visa to be able to get potentially a pathway to citizenship. Because in Brazil, it's citizenship by birthright, by being just there, existing, being born in the country. Having that possibility of the quote unquote anchor baby, even though many people may hate that term, it is something that in some parts of the world does exist, that it is a legitimate path for some mothers to be able to have a child and reside there. If I'm not mistaken, the only two countries where this is now possible are Mexico and Brazil, to be able to give birth, that the child is given citizenship automatically, and then the mother would be given the right to be able to remain with their child. Because, I mean, how can a child just be there on their own? And if I'm not mistaken, even in Brazil, this leads to an expedited process for citizenship for the mother. And again, though, this is not legal advice. These are just some things that you want to think about. What can you do? What things can you set up for yourself in the best way? I'm not saying set yourself up by having a baby just for citizenship. No way, no how. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. Really, really bad idea. But I'm saying, if you are thinking about moving abroad, if you're thinking about having a family, if you're already in that kind of phase of life, well, actually, even Brazil could have certain visas that might be open to you and your family that would allow you just to arrive there anyway. And if you have that visa to remain in that country and you happen to have a child who's born there, okay, like this is a different type of situation that we're talking about here. And even now in Portugal, if I'm not mistaken, the law was changed, I think, in the last few years for valid visa holders. If their children are born in Portugal, that the child automatically is recognized as a citizen of Portugal. I could be wrong about this, but again, I'm not here to be giving legal advice. I'm just saying these are things that you want to start looking at. What are the options, not only for yourself, but if you have children, what are the options for them? Or say, for example, I know a couple that they are retired. One of them is an Italian dual citizen. The other one is not. They reside somewhere in the European Union, and they are able to reside there because the one spouse with Italian dual citizenship has the right to be living inside of the EU. And based on that, their spouse has the ability to get a family reunification visa and residency to be able to stay there with their Italian spouse. So these are also other options. If you are in a relationship, you want to look through your family lines and what might be available to you. I mean, say, for example, if you have Polish ancestry, Austrian ancestry, Hungarian ancestry, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever it might be, there could be a pathway, or even Irish, there could be a pathway for you to be able to have an ability to remain in a certain part of the world. Or, for example, there are certain rights of return for certain parts of the world. Like, if I'm not mistaken, in Africa, there are certain programs that exist. Israel is another country that has this law of return. And then there are other various options that are available to different peoples. I'm not saying you should do something or you shouldn't do something. And if I'm naming a country, that doesn't mean I'm endorsing them. It's just I'm saying this is something that exists in this world. Or, for example, people from Portuguese-speaking nations have the ability to end up in Portugal a little bit easier than people from other nations. And so this is something that also people start planning for, that maybe they might go to Portugal and they get their residency visa there. They do their 5 years of residence, then they get their permanent residency, and then they make their application for citizenship. And then from Portugal, they decide to go to another European nation. This is not something that is uncommon. I've heard about this from a lot of different people from a lot of different countries. I know of a number of Brazilians that do this. I'm not saying I know them personally. I'm just saying that I know this is a common thing that a lot of Brazilians do. Even that there are some people who get their Italian citizenship by descent and decide they want to go to Germany, Sweden, wherever it might be, that they feel as though that they have better job opportunities in front of them. This is one of the reasons why earlier in the episode I mentioned that if you only have a few months in front of you to get everything planned and everything ready to go, it might not be the best for you to start thinking about moving abroad. But if you have quite a bit of time in front of you, that you'll probably be able to set yourself up for success a bit better, because there are a lot of things that you want to think about. Strategizing in the right way. What is the best plan for you? Where do you want to go? Like, that's the first thing. Like, what's the country you want to end up in? Okay, you've chosen the country that you're interested in. What are the requirements to be there? Do you fit into any of those categories to be able to remain there? Whether that is through a citizenship that you maybe already have, or citizenship that you're eligible for from your ancestry, or that you have the ability to fit into one of the categories for a specific visa to end up there. These are all things that you really, really, really have to do that research into. Again, this episode is not telling you how to do things. It's here to just kind of say, these are the rough kind of guidelines of what you want to take into consideration. Because when you're looking at some of these things for the very first time, it's kind of hard to know up from down and how things work. Because if you've only ever lived in your country, you've never had to think before in your life about how you're going to be able to remain there, because you don't have to, generally speaking, assuming that you're born into a country, into a life where you happen to be a natural citizen by birth. This is not the situation for everybody. So I'm definitely generalizing here. And of course, though, you do have to take into consideration what are the upsides and the downsides of where you're going, the potential visas, and also potential ups and downsides to the citizenships as well. For example, in a country like Argentina, if I'm not mistaken, at least you can't actually renounce your citizenship there. Once you're a citizen, that's it. End of story. You can't give it up. So if something were to happen in that country that you were not in line with, that would lead you to wanting to give up your citizenship, you might not even have that option in front of you. Or would you be looking at certain options that might kind of give you more flexibility, like in Paraguay, for example, like with the residency there, the requirements for citizenship can be minimal from what I've heard. But of course, a lot of people look at moving abroad to be able to explore the rest of the world, and they kind of have their hub and spokes that they kind of go to, that they have their main hub in one country, and then they can go and travel to other places from that particular hub. You also have to consider, if you have a visa in a certain country, you might be limited with how much traveling and how much time you can spend outside of that country. So for example, in the European Union, if you're given a visa to remain in a particular country, that means you have the right to remain in that country. If you're not a citizen of that nation or any other European nation, then you are going to be limited outside of that country. You're not going to have the same rights. If a country has given you permission to be in that country, then you have the permission to be in that country, not the next door neighbor. I'm bringing this up because there are some people who are under the impression that if you are living in one European nation and you have that residency visa there, that you can go be in anywhere, and it doesn't work like that. It's for citizens. There are some exceptions. If you have some permanent residency, that you can maybe spend a little bit more time in this and that and the other. But generally speaking, you need to be able to spend the majority of your time in that country. And even if you're wanting to get certain visas or let your visa remain valid, you'll have a minimum requirement for how long you'll have to spend in that country. And then even for citizenship, you may have to even prove that you've spent X amount of time out of the last X amount of years within the borders of the nation. Or if you don't have to be the one to provide the proof to show that you've actually been where you're saying, they may still do a check to see if you've gone in and out by plane, for example, might be one way that they might look into their systems. But anyway, I'm going to round this episode out here. So of course, thank you so much to those of you who support this project in all the various ways, to liking and sharing these episodes with your friends, and commenting, sharing your thoughts down in the comment section below. And an even bigger thank you, a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through patreon.com/RafaelDeFuria and RafaelDeFuria.com/support, as well as the one-time supports through the super thanks button here on YouTube. Of course, as always, this is an open conversation, so feel free to leave any thoughts down in the comment section below here on YouTube. And yes, I am still Rafael Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.